Is God an alien?
Well, I think it depends on how you define the word alien. Is God an extraterrestrial? No, he is not. But I think if we look at it from the standpoint of have we been alienated from God through the sin that was committed in the garden by Adam and Eve when they rebelled against his one instruction, if God is alien to us, it's because we have followed our own path. We have separated ourselves from him. And really, that's what the biblical narrative is all about. It's we are the prodigal son trying to make our way back home to the Father. So, no, but in the sense of, is God an extraterrestrial? No, absolutely not. That's a relatively modern idea that, and I in the sections that I wrote, I trace the origins of that idea to its modern ancient aliens concept, which is now, 21 seasons on the History Channel?
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute, because that's a big issue in today's world. And another question here, was Jesus an alien in a human suit, human flesh? Was Jesus an alien?
Yeah, again, it's interesting and very timely that we're having this conversation, because I've been engaging with some folks on social media lately who are promoting this idea. Now, they're not getting a lot of traction. It's not a widely held belief, but believe it or not, there is a growing body of believers who are returning to a heresy that first emerged in the 2nd century. There was a fellow named Marcion who was from a city in what's now northern Turkey, Marcion of Sinope, and he decided that because the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh, was mean and violent, he couldn't possibly be Jesus. Well, there's a group of modern-day believers that are taking that idea and marrying it to the ancient aliens idea and saying that not only is Jesus and Yahweh different beings, but they're both aliens, extraterrestrials, and Jesus is coming back for us with a fleet of UFOs. It sounds ridiculous, but there are some people who find that easier to believe than to believe in God as he's revealed himself in Scripture. The answer to the question simply is no. Jesus is not an extraterrestrial. He was not an ET in a human suit. He is divine. He is supernatural. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He spoke all things into creation. Now again, as different as that is from we humans who were created to live in this natural plane of existence, that may seem alien in the terms of being foreign or strange or different, but in terms of being an extraterrestrial, no.
Yeah. So this is a narrative that's huge right now, and that is, were we created by aliens that put us here on the earth, and they're going to come back sometime to help us evolve or whatever? Were we created by an ancient race of aliens from a distant galaxy?
Yeah, this has been promoted in recent years, especially it began around 1969 with the English translation of Eric von Daniken's book, Chariots of the Gods. That has become the best-selling book in the category of archaeology, but when it comes to that book, you've got to put that in air quotes, in history. Over 60 million copies of that book in English alone. And then a gentleman named Zecharia Sitchin, who is no longer with us, wrote a book called The 12th Planet, where he claimed that Sumerian texts, the Sumerians were an ancient culture that kind of faded from history around the year 2000 BC, just before the time of Abraham, that these texts noted that there was a strange planet in the sky from which the great gods of Sumer, the Anunnaki, descended and created humanity. Zecharia Sitchin's work has become almost like a religious text for the people who believe in this ancient aliens idea. But scholars who actually read Sumerian say that either Sitchin couldn't read Sumerian and made stuff up, or he could read Sumerian and he made stuff up, because it's just not in those texts. It's just not there.
Well, so, the Catholic Church, Tom Horn, the late Tom Horn was a friend of you and me both, brilliant guy. But, he and Chris Putnam did a lot of research on the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church, they have a observatory on Mount Graham in the United States, and they actually have an infrared telescope named Lucifer, And according to them, they're watching something come, and they basically believe that aliens are on their way here, and when they get here, they may be baptizing us. Is that true?
Yeah, that was something that Tom and Chris wrote about in extensively in what was the book? Ex Vaticana.
Ex Vaticana, yeah.
Yeah, and I recommend people dig into that to see what research they uncovered. Tom and Chris are both excellent researchers. What's interesting about that, and this is something that we go into in Destination Earth, is that this is also an occult belief that goes back to the 19th century occultist Helena Blavatsky, the founder of a religion called Theosophy. She believed that she was hearing from ascended masters, humans who had managed to transcend and become eternal beings, coming from somewhere in the vicinity of the star Sirius. And interestingly, Sirius is very important to a number of occult traditions, including Freemasonry, one of the occult organizations that Aleister Crowley was a part of, the AA. Sirius was very important. And it's kind of curious that one of the leading proponents of official disclosure, Dr. Stephen Greer, when he put out a documentary about 10 years ago on this movement to try to make official contact and force governments of the world to admit that they've been in contact with extraterrestrials, he called his documentary Sirius. But as we go into in the book, that these organizations and the occultists, for whatever reason, seem to be fixated on the ancient Egyptian god of chaos called Set. In fact, Dr. Greer's organization to make contact with extraterrestrials, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, SETI. And then there's the secular organization, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is SETI. Both of those names essentially in Egyptian mean man of Set, man of the chaos god. Seti was actually the name of the father of Pharaoh Ramses the Great. The chaos god, Set, that would essentially be the Egyptian form of Leviathan. So why are they trying to contact this entity? And I dive really deeply in the book into this god of chaos, known to the Greeks as Typhon, and how this has influenced modern day occult systems. It's really strange when you start digging into this. The search for ET is not a scientific endeavor. It is really a religion.
That's exactly right. So why does the church shy away from studying issues like aliens and things like that?
I think because it's weird, and because there's been a stigma attached to it, although, as you rightly note, it is becoming less so since 2017 in the release of that video, the so-called Tic Tac video, which comes from the 2004 USS Nimitz incident off the West Coast. It has been more acceptable for the legacy media to report on it. Tucker Carlson's been in a lot of programs on it, but it was widely reported back in 2017 by the New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, MSNBC, Fox News. It was headlines all around the world. So it's not as stigmatized as it used to be, but it's one of those things where I think, and I'm not a pastor, so I can't speak to this from personal experience, but I would imagine it's the kind of thing where if you get up into the pulpit on a Sunday morning and start talking about aliens, you might have a good portion of your congregation start wondering if they've got the right pastor.
I can promise you as a pastor, that's true. That's true. But you know, the thing is, you can't deny in the world today that there are, UFOs. I mean, the military footage, the preponderance of evidence, the hearings before the Senate and the House where they're having intelligence experts and military experts come in and verifying the fact that we have wreckage. We have, in fact, in one case, they said we have biological evidence, which are the dead bodies of the aliens and, Roswell and that kind of thing like that. And so I believe it's so important for the church to be talking about this today because it has to do with a coming deception. There is a coming deception in the world, and I want you to talk about that. Who the aliens were and how they feel they fit into the Antichrist grand scheme.
Well, I think when you look through history, the enemy, the fallen realms, principalities, powers, cosmic rulers over this present darkness, will use whatever cultural expectations we humans have as the springboard for deception. For example, when we first start reading accounts of unidentified flying objects from the late 19th century, they were typically described as looking like dirigibles, blimps, because balloons and ballooning had just become a well-known phenomenon around the time of the Civil War, where the North and the South would use balloons for surveillance on the enemy lines and so forth. So when you had a report from Texas in the 1890s, it looked like a dirigible, like a Zeppelin. Now you get to 1947 and the very famous Kenneth Arnold sighting off the Pacific Northwest near the Cascades. He described flying wings, but he said these flying wings moved like saucers being skipped on water. And a headline writer said, "Oh, flying saucers." And so that became the headline. That phrase stuck. And suddenly every science fiction movie that, the 40s and 50s depicting aliens showed these things that looked like flying dinner plates. That's not what Kenneth Arnold said he saw, but that's suddenly what people reported seeing, and that's how they were depicted by Hollywood. So I think the enemy will use what we expect to see as a springboard for a great deception. Now, in the ancient world, they knew when they were seeing, gods, angels, when they were being possessed by demons. Nowadays, we've gotten so scientific, or rather scientistic. We've made a religion of science. It's the only way to determine absolute truth. We are more likely to believe in a visitation from Zeta Reticuli than we are to believe the manifestation of Jesus at the head of a heavenly host. And,
absolutely.
I think that is how the enemy is going to try to leverage this concept that's been promoted. And that's why we spent a couple chapters on this in the book. Science fiction as the propagation of the ET gospel.
Well, I read a stat, this has been years ago, that in Europe, more people believe in UFOs than believe in God. And through the movies, the modern day movies, we are very conditioned I think as a globe to accept aliens when they come, and
well, so absolutely agree. Absolutely
you
agree.
believe that this is a part of the coming deception, is aliens basically showing up. I know Billy Crone's on the show and L.A. Marzulli, but they believe that when we go up in the rapture, these beings are going to come down, and that's part of the great deception. Do you believe that?
That may well be. I haven't studied it as deeply as L.A. did. I have a great deal of respect for L.A. The very first book I ever read on the Nephilim was his novel titled Nephilim. So I blame L.A. for me getting into this whole line of research and work going back more than 25 years. But I think he's onto something. Where I focused was on where do we get the idea that the gods of the ancient world, the gods of the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, the Akkadians, the Canaanites, the Hurrians, where do we get this idea that these were astronauts? And again, that's a relatively recent idea that comes out of 19th and early 20th century occultism.
Wow. What did Jesus say about the, alien God interpretation? Did he ever refute that?